Welcome everyone to the Afro Latinx Charla in recognition of Black History Month. I'm Antonio Tijerino of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. We are thrilled to provide our Charla platform for a group of Afro Latinx familia to share their unique stories, perspectives, ideas, and calls to action this afternoon. This is the first Charla of 2021, which demonstrates how important it is that we highlight our Afro Latinx brothers, sisters, and non-binary members of our community. 1 in 4 U.S. Latinx identify as Afro Latinx, and almost 3% of the overall American population also represent our Black Latinx community. And that representation is strong and making a greater impact every single moment. But we can't lose sight of the obstacles that are even bigger for them than our general Latinx community in education, access to healthcare, poverty levels, and of course, racism. I don't know if you remember over the summer when CNN reporter Omar Jimenez was arrested on live TV while covering the George Floyd murder aftermath in Minneapolis, which I remember watching as he was thrown on the ground and handcuffed, even though he was displaying his media credentials. And his white colleague was right next to him and he wasn't arrested. Well, he was arrested because he was a Black man, punto. And so as much as we don't want to be the target of bias and bigotry as Latinx, we want to be included in America's plans going forward. We need to be more aware of our own racism and bias. If we're from US, Latin America, or the Caribbean, believe me, we're coming from a racist society that is stained by white supremacy. As my brother Luis Versalles, who will be speaking on this charla in a few moments, once told me, we had a head start in Latin America to racism. But we have a chance to change that. And these charlas are designed for us to listen, learn, ask, act, as the speakers provide us with important perspectives, experiences, resources, understanding, and guidance. I'm also looking forward to this charla because when I see this lineup, some of them are very close friends, as well as new friends that are as exciting as seeing old friends. I want to offer a special thank you to our friends at the American Heart Association who will be represented on this charla, as well as our partners at AARP. Thanks, Yvette, always for representing ACER, and CHCI, who will be joining us today. He's not on right now, but I just want to give a lot of love to Sid Wilson because they had a Latinx Black History Month talk yesterday or 2 days ago, and they crushed it. So speaking of crushing it, we are thrilled to have as our host and inspiration for today's charla, Kim Haas. Kim has worked on television for years and is currently the host and executive producer of the PBS series Afro Latinx Travels with Kim Haas. The series was inspired by her personal interactions with Afro Latinx people throughout her travels to the Caribbean and Latin America, and her desire to highlight and celebrate the rich history of culture that Black people contribute to our regions. With that, please welcome Kim.
Thank you. Bienvenidos. Hola. Saludos a todos. Thank you, Antonio, for the wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. As Antonio mentioned, my name is Kim Haas, and I am the executive producer and host of the PBS series Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas, and it's my true honor to be moderating today's charla. And as Antonio mentioned, during today's charla, we will hear from Afro-Latinx speakers as they share their experiences and their personal approach to how to identify solutions within the communities. And as a reminder, this Loft Charla is a platform to connect our community from all over the country, and I think that's so fabulous. Therefore, we strive to create a safe and open environment for our speakers and guests. We ask that everyone be respectful of everyone else's time, differing opinions. Also on the chat box, make sure to change the option to all panelists and all attendees so we can see all your comments and not just the panelists. And before we start our charla, we want you to know that the views expressed and the stories shared are solely the opinion of each participant and not of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation or our stakeholders. And thank you again for participating. We hope that you enjoy our charla and also encourage you to continue this discussion and our content, which is going to be on our website at the HispanicHeritageFoundation.org and YouTube channel. So I have, again, the great pleasure of kind of kicking it off this afternoon. And I'd like to start off by just talking to you a little bit and speaking with you about kind of my inspiration for the travel series that is currently on the air on PBS. And I wanted to share with you the impetus for why this series is so important to me and how it got started. And so you can see a little bit of my inspiration in the upcoming slides and the presentation that I'm going to share with you. So what I'd like to tell you and just share with you this afternoon is that obviously it's Black History Month, and this is an extremely important time of the year, a time for us to honor the African descendants in Latin America. And I think as Antonio was mentioning, next slide, please. One of the most important things to remember about and know about our population is that 1/4 of Latin America's Latin Americans are of African ancestry, and that's self-identified African ancestry. So this is a very significant portion of the population. We see those same numbers in the United States population as well. About 1/4 of US Latinos, the Latinx population, identifies and claims African ancestry. But however, with this significant number, I'm watching Spanish language television. I watch Telemundo, and I grew up watching Univision. And unfortunately, I never saw the people who looked like me when I traveled throughout Latin America. And it was heartbreaking, and it was frustrating, and it was disheartening. And sometimes I got angry. And I thought about all these incredible people that I'd met on my journeys. And between being in Havana, in Puerto Plata, the Dominican Republic, in Caracas, in Cartagena, Colombia, and knowing about the history of Afro-Mexicans in Mexico, and still not seeing any of these people, these amazing people with incredible stories on television. And I know the power of television to make people's perceptions, thoughts, and opinions. And so eventually I came up with this idea a decade ago that I wasn't going to wait for Univision or Telemundo to bring me the stories that I wanted to see. I wasn't going to wait for Univision or Telemundo to show these amazing people that I had met on these incredible journeys that I had. And because I had a particular interest in the performing arts, I wanted to capture and let these people tell their stories. And so that's how the idea of Afro-Latino Travels came about. I wanted to bring to the small screen, to television, all these incredible people that you and I know that are family members that aren't getting their chance to share their stories. So next slide, please. So some of the people that I've met on my travels, and I wanted to share these slides with you. And this is one of the slides from an incredible group in Brazil, for those of you who may be familiar with Salvador and with Salvador's rich Afro-Brazilian culture. This is a group called IIAFE, and they do tremendous work at really preserving Afro-Brazilian culture. And I thought how beautiful these ladies are, and what a shame that we don't see them on television. We don't see people who look like them. But I wanted to just share that with you, how inspired I am when I see them. Next slide, please. And this is actually a slide from the show. This is our episodes that are on now are from Costa Rica. And this is from Limon. I don't know if we have any Ticos in the audience, but this is from a clip that we did with Selvin Brown, who's a restaurateur. He owns a great restaurant right on the beach in Limon, in Puerto Viejo, Limon, in Costa Rica. And Selvin is just wonderful. He's just a great spirit, an absolute delight. And he's featured in our Limon episode. And he's the kind of person that I've seen plenty of cooking segments on Telemundo and have yet to see anyone who's Afro-Latino, Afro-Latinx. I'd love to see someone like Selvin, but we're not waiting anymore for that. And that's why he's part of our show. It's an incredible history of how Afro-Costa Ricans and people of African descent have so richly empowered and strengthened Costa Rica. And so next slide, please. And this is for folks from Puerto Rico. This is, you may recognize Jesus Cepeda. This is one of my favorite pictures. Jesus Cepeda comes from a family so rich in tradition with bomba. and Bomba's strong Afro-Puerto Rican roots. And this is at Jesus's family home, which has been turned into a museum to preserve the rich legacy of Bomba and the traditions that his parents set forth for him. And Bomba, you can see, has really grown in popularity, and in great part to his parents and the commitment they had to keeping the strong legacy of Bomba on the island and spreading it throughout. So it's one of my favorite photos, and I always like to share it. Next slide, please. Got some folks loving Bomba there, good. And this is a dancer, Sharifah Clark, and this is from the Costa de San Jose episode of Afro-Latino Travels. And I took this picture and I share this with you because I think about after we shot this segment with Sharifah, I was close to having tears in my eyes. And I was so moved because of her grace, her charm, her spirit, her elegance. And I can remember growing up and hearing that Black people and people of African descent were not made, did not have the bodies, did not have the capabilities to dance and to perform ballet and to be ballerinas. And so when I danced with her in the park, and believe me, she's a true dancer, but when I danced with her, it brought me to tears at how much grace she had and why we don't see people like Sharifah on Spanish language television, and we don't see them, and why we all lose out when they're not spotlighted and people like her. So I give all props to her and dancers like her who have tremendous pride and tremendous passion. Next slide, please. And this is also from a recent trip in 2019 that I took to Rio. If there are any cariocas out there, this is in front of one of these incredible murals. And I say that and I share this because of the tremendous artistry and how much talent we have in the African diaspora and the Afro-Latino community. And this mural is near Rio's wharf, which is called, this area is called Little Africa in Rio. And so this is where Afro-Brazilians were brought in as enslaved. And so it has special significance for me. Brazil, as you may know, has at least 55% of the population is Afro-Brazilian or is Afro-Brazilian roots. And yet, when you go to Brazil, when I went 2 years ago, this is the second trip of mine, some of it's really heartbreaking. And I felt like I was in the 1950s because the segregation and the conditions in which Black and brown people live in is often, it's heartbreaking. And as Antonio is sharing, yeah, it looks like easy 90% of Black and brown people are the ones that are arrested. And so there's a lot of inequality in Brazil, and I still love it and have great passion and interest for Brazil. But sometimes it's really hard to be there and to witness the kind of treatment that Afro-Brazilians in particular are faced with on a daily basis. Next slide, please. And speaking of Brazil and Rio, this is a slide from Ms. Nilcimar Nogueira. And I have to tell you, she is incredible. And her family, you want to talk about DNA and legacy, her grandparents, her grandfather in particular, Cartolo, was one of the pioneers of Afro-Brazilian, of samba. So when you think about samba, it is pretty much synonymous with Brazil. But I don't know how many Brazilians really realize the incredible impact that Afro-Brazilians had in starting and creating samba. And this is so important. And she strives daily to make sure that Afro-Brazilian culture is recognized, that Afro-Brazilians are part of carnival traditions, which this year, will not be held, and that it's not taken away from Afro-Brazilians, and that they play a key role in samba and in the carnival traditions. And meeting with her, which was a true delight, to have somebody who has samba really running through their veins. Next slide, please. And this is a picture of a gentleman, Cosme, who I met in a favela. And for those of you, if you're familiar with the favelas, if not, they're the structures that are built on houses in Rio, the homes that are built on hills in Rio. And so often the great majority of people look like all of us that are on the chat right now are Black and brown people, Afro-Brazilians, and people of mixed ancestry. And Cosme is just wonderful, and he's doing great work to inspire Afro-Brazilian youth and LGBTQ youth about their role and aspiring to be leaders in Brazil. And I just really admired him. And this is right before we took our first steps, and he gave me a tour of Providencias favela, which is the oldest favela in Rio. And one of the coming slides, please. And these were two wonderful ladies, a mother and a daughter, who I met in Rio in that same favela, who welcomed me with open arms and open spirit and such warmth and hospitality. And I want to include them because I want them to be seen. I want them, their faces to be shown, and I want them to be known. And unfortunately, these are not the people that you see when you watch Brazilian television, but they are here, they are thriving, and I'm honored to always include them in my presentations. Next slide, please. And this is one of the last slides, and I call it a gentleman in Rio because I met Antonio at the Marriott, and he was just absolutely lovely. And you can see his smile. He greeted me with open arms. It was as if we had known each other forever. And I have to tell you, Antonio is such a kind person. He's the bellman at the Marriott Copacabana. And he's the kind of person that I do this for. And I say that because I asked him, what is it like to be Afro-Brazilian? What is it like for you as a man in Rio? And he told me how hard it is for him when he walks the streets, and you all have heard this before here in the US, how people will cross over to the other side, how people don't look at him, how he is not honored as a human being, and they do not see his humanity. And I cannot think of a person who, with such grace and charm and an open heart and open spirit, and how difficult and challenging that must be for him on a daily basis. And I pose this question and always wonder, will Antonio have a chance to show the world who he is and all he has to offer, in spite of Brazil and the challenges that we face and the challenges that he faces as a Black man, as an Afro-Brazilian? Will he, what talents he has, drives and dreams, be able to share that? And so I want to always honor him and recognize him and thank him for being, despite all that, for being the gentleman that he is and the gentleman in Rio that I met about 2 years ago. So last slide, please. And despite all of that, I just want to leave us as we start on this journey this afternoon, thinking about the promise of tomorrow, and that, you know, our young people, but also us as we as adults, can bring so much. And having this charla this afternoon, I think, can give us hope and inspiration. And we look to inspiring young people to make things better. And I hope that the TV show will allow us to let young people thrive and let them dream and dream big and not limit themselves and not be constrained by racism and other people's limitations about who they are and who they can be simply because of the color of their skin. And this last thing I just want to share with you is I was recently reading an article about a young boy about the age of these children in Brazil in one of the favelas. And this was after the death of Chadwick Boseman, Black Panther. And prior to that, his parents said how hard it was for him. And he said he thought that Black people were dirty because that's what he was growing up with. And as a result of Black Panther, he knew he had superpowers and that he could do so much. And so I don't profess to be, you know, the female version of Black Panther, but what I say is that I hope the travel show will inspire not just young people, but also all of us each day to do better and better for each other. So thank you. Gracias. So with that, I want to move in and actually we're going to move over and let Luis, he's going to take over, and Luis Versalles is going to grace us with his remarks and wisdom. Luis is Executive Director of the Courageous Conversation by Pacific Educational Group, and he's going to share his thoughts and words with us. So Luis, adelante.
Wow, Kim, I'm so moved just by taking in the beauty of what you shared with us. So first of all, I honor you and acknowledge you for your leadership for our community to make sure that we are seen and celebrated in the beauty of who we are. I honor this amazing panel, but just your presence. I believe our ancestors dreamt us to these moments. So appreciate our panel for inspiring me. And a mi hermano, Antonio, muchísimas gracias, mi hermano. Thank you to you and Hispanic Heritage Foundation for creating this space to make sure that the Afro Latinx story in this story of Black History Month is also acknowledged. And I am here, y'all, joining you from 15 minutes from a place called Bedote, which is the land of the creation story of the original custodians of the land I'm on, the Dakota people, the city of Minneapolis. And I come as the grandson of two Afro-Cuban grandparents, Soylo Versalles Sr. and Teresa Pedroso Flores. So I call my grandparents to give me strength and guidance, as well as I bring in my voice to this space, recognizing I am them and they are me. And I also acknowledge being the grandson of two white Cuban grandparents as well, Ramon and Amparo. And this journey around race, this journey around what it means to be Afro-Latinx, to grow up in Minneapolis, to my parents, Regla y Lázaro Versalles, who came to this country in the early 60s trying to find their way, has been the journey of my life. And not surprisingly, as an educator, making sure our young people know their brilliance, know their voice, know they have a right to a schooling process where they feel seen, and a schooling process that works for them has been my calling. And what I want to talk about today is, how do we find our voice? And very specifically, how do we, as a community, first acknowledge our racial history? As Antonio said, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We have had a head start on this internalized oppression around this socially constructed belief system that we call race, that has complicated this conversation and has created, as we hear from Kim, this 24% in Latino America. As we think about, this 24% of Latinx folks in the United States, what's also coexisting with that is the reality that a third of Black people in the United States of Latin American descent racially identified as white in 2010. And so, it has been affirming and yet challenging for me to think about what this journey has meant for me, being called Havao in my family, growing up with that racial nickname. As you know, we love to have our racial nicknames in our family. And I haven't always had a way to talk about it. And so our work with Courageous Conversation by Pacific Educational Group was founded 29 years ago by our founder and CEO, Glenn Singleton, really from a belief that we need to stop tiptoeing around this conversation. We need to enter in powerfully. We need to have a way in where all of our stories matter. We need to learn how to stay in the conversation where it gets difficult, where we have to acknowledge the multiple racial experiences. Yes, within the Latinx community, the multiraciality within our community. And thirdly, we have to understand, no matter who you are in this continuum, what we also share, as Antonio said, is a legacy of being socialized around whiteness, around white supremacy. And most importantly, what does it look like to start to heal? What does this healing need to look like for our young people? As I sit with the challenging figures around suicide, mental health challenges for our young people in the Latinx community. And I firmly believe that when we can empower our young people to know the truth of who they are and not the lies of what we've been taught and what we've been bombarded with each and every day, then this intergenerational healing for our young people, our elders, can emerge. And so, that is my why. And I'm honored to be joined by mi hermana Gloria as well. Gloria is a leader in our work, and we invite you all to join us. If you go to courageousconversation.com, you can read more about what we call our Latinx Summit for Courageous Conversation in April, the 27th to the 30th of April of 2022. And my call is we have to lift up our voices and tell our stories, and not just tell our stories, really hold our systems accountable to making sure they work for us, that racial equity is not an ideal, it's a reality we live and experience each and every day. And so thank you all.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And there's nothing like finding your voice and standing strong in it. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the pleasure of hearing from Yvette Peña. Hola, Yvette. And Yvette is Vice President of Multicultural Leadership at AARP. Adelante, por favor, Yvette.
Hola, Kim, y muchas gracias. And gracias to Tony Tijerino and the Hispanic Heritage Foundation team for the invitation to this very timely charla during Black History Month. I'm going to take you through a very visual part of my story, of mi vida. I grew up in the melting pot of New York City, on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I remember playing outside of two neighborhood schoolyards under the careful watch of my Afro-Latina Dominican tias. My tias took turns with the neighborhood moms to ensure our safety. All of my cousins played together with multiracial children, as was the composition of my neighborhood. Not everyone spoke Spanish, but if they wanted to play, they were welcome to our little kids crew. Our only rule when we went to play outside was that we had to be home when the street lights came on. And I didn't truly understand why we ran home. As time went on, it finally clicked. We did so to beat the police patrol car that drove by when darkness began creeping in. It was a safety issue because all kids of color on my block were usually the ones stopped by the police at times for no reason. It caused a sense of fear and helplessness. During my early years of childhood, I didn't really have an identity, a label. I knew that I spoke Spanish and that my parents were from Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. The forms at school didn't have a box for me to check to help me identify. So was I really in the other category? Was I Black? The color of my skin was Black, but to the community, to the Black community, I was not Black because I spoke Spanish. My family, who were all shades, all different kinds of skin tones, never identified as Black, but as Dominicanos. This was all so conflicting to me as a kid. And the light-skinned Latinos did see me as La Negrita. My hair was curly, or pelo malo, to most Dominicans, and so it was straightened. And I couldn't fit in, so that I could fit in with las niñas blancas de pelo lacio. And it was dried in a hot secadora with rollers that were bigger than my own head. Another measure taken by my mother to keep me safe, to lessen the discrimination that I would face, and to allow for more acceptance. Who was I? Sometimes I felt like an alien, like I didn't belong anywhere. I had an identity crisis that no one could really help me solve. Throughout my journey into adult life, I embraced my being Black and Latina. It took many experiences, and not all were pleasant, to feel proud to be Afro-Latina and begin living a life that would make my African ancestors proud. those who journeyed from Africa through Spain, Portugal, Cuba, Puerto Rico to settle in the Dominican Republic. I have faced much prejudice since my early childhood, and it has prepared me to be bold and a bit fearless of time. I have faced microaggressions, unconscious bias, where I have to educate people on why or why what they may have said is not okay. You can't stay silent. It's best to call out the behavior when it happens, when it occurs, even if it's within your own ethnic group. Racism, not only because I'm a Black Latina woman, but because I have an accent. But I use my voice to speak up proudly, and my bilingualness has helped me to be where I am today. The ability to speak to my Latino community in 2 languages as I carry out my hard work, my social mission at AARP is the most fulfilling way to work, to be an empowered, actionable voice for the creation of a Smithsonian American Latino Museum on the Washington, D.C. National Mall, where all of our rich stories and journeys will be documented and shared. Having to work harder than non-people of color to move up in my career, I felt I had to work harder and pitch my superpower as an Afro-Latina with diversity of thought and a skill set that are an asset to all employers. We are living in different times now. Our lives will never be the same, given the pandemics that we faced in 1 year. 2020 was the year of many pandemics, coronavirus, racial injustice, disparities, among many others. It's now Black History Month. But for those of us who are Black and Afro-Latinos, we live and celebrate being Black year-round and also face many of the same systemic racism challenges in our daily lives. We must stay woke and take deliberate action. There is momentum driven by the Black Lives Matter movement. The time is now for all of us to unite, because when we come together, we make good change. It's time to drive systemic change and take leadership roles where you may find yourself via community groups, volunteering for good causes, hosting and participating in courageous conversations such as this one, and leading with empathy and love. We all need to change the lens of hate and replace it with love and empathy. Juntos, we can build a more positive story for our future generations to look back on. Let's work towards being all people so that we can all play together safely with no negative judgment and open hearts. So let's work towards being able to play together. I really hope that this short charla empowers you to be bold and courageous and to take at least one small action to drive systemic change in your world. Gracias, and thank you for the opportunity to let me tell you my story.
Yvette, what a story. What a story. Thank you so much. You talk about empowerment and love. I mean, it was just beautiful and great pictures. And so I think we were all so inspired by your words. Thank you so very much.
Gracias, my pleasure. And some of those pictures are from my neighborhood. So that's why I'm very proud to have shared them.
Yeah, no, they're wonderful. It's great to see. Thank you. Thank you so much. So next we have Dante Doig Acuna, and Dante is head of product at Ritual Wellbeing. Dante, por favor.
Hola, saludos a todos. Can everyone hear me? Great. All right. Cool. Hey, what's up, Brian? See you in the chat. Thank you to everyone who's just went. I mean, these are beautiful stories and super inspiring. So I'm a lifelong New Yorker, a tech entrepreneur, a musician, and activist. Today, I'm going to just talk about the ideas that relate to my activism. I don't have any slides. I'll just talk and y'all hear me from here. So I'm going to make an observation. I'll tell a short story, and then I'll tie it together with a theory touching on one issue, police brutality, but that I believe is a microcosm of many other issues that have the same roots. So in Latin America, near the Caribbean basin, you have real large Black populations. Everywhere else, you have large indigenous American descended populations. And throughout all of Latin America, Black and indigenous people live in the worst conditions, enjoy the fewest rights, and overall face the biggest troubles. Yet, Latin America listens to African-derived music, has had many famous Black icons, and has incorporated much of the culture. Although, as Kim pointed out, if you go there and you turn on the news, you won't find any Black people, or if you turn on the novellas, you'll find very few of us in any real depictions. But nonetheless, it's a culture that's clearly embraced Black people into its main culture. Here in the US, we see kind of a similar dynamic. Tons of embrace of Black music, Black athletes. We got a Black president, yet the Black masses remain oppressed. I'm gonna move on towards my life. So when I was young in Brooklyn, starting about in middle school, my friends and I began to experience run-ins with the police. As you had talked about, that stuff starts very early. We witnessed the police harass and abuse our friends while we were preteens for things like loitering near our train station, general insubordination, random stops and frisks. Remember one time my sister saw another girl, about 12 years old, get her head slammed into the wall by an adult policeman. And now, of course, we have footage of many of these things. Back then, we really didn't have the footage, but everyone knew. It was like an open secret. Come in before the streetlights come on. When you're traveling, you have to go around certain routes, etc. By the time I left high school, almost everyone I knew had been at some point menaced or beaten by the police. When I got to college, I witnessed very different run-ins. Specific, I'll talk about one. I remember going to a big frat party and the cops came to shut it down. And the white frat member who went to open the door was definitely intoxicated on many substances and opens the door, sees the police, curses him out, slams the door in his face. My first time in such a situation, I'm thinking, he just signed his own death sentence. It's terrifying. But of course, it didn't happen that way. The cop, they talked it out, the cop walked away. The cop was furious, but restrained. So in the wake of many of the things that have been going on, or many of the videos we've seen, I got to thinking about, reflecting back on these circumstances and thought, why did the police react so differently in these cases? So let's look at the issue broadly. Like, police brutality is not just in New York where I experienced it, but of course in places like Minnesota, where Luis is from, where George Floyd died, and even places like Atlanta, where under a liberal Black mayor, and it's often perpetrated by Black police. So it seems as though it can't just be because, certainly it's not if a Black police officer, attacks a Black person, it's not purely out of just dislike from a racial basis, right? Something else. And I started thinking about solutions that people often recommend: sensitivity training, a more diverse police force, better representation in key offices, etc. So I should dissect the issue more. What I realized is that the police at the frat house weren't particularly sensitive to the needs and the humanity of the frat boys. If they had their way, they would have beat the guy's head in two, but they didn't have their way. They responded to power. They knew that if they had done anything aggressive, they probably would never have worked in that state anymore. And the theory I want to use to tie this together is essentially that it's power and the unequal distribution of power that keeps us in these cycles, not just representation, though representation is important. So really the rule that I started to focus on is all of society's benefits will accrue to those with political power. All of society's burdens will accrue to those without political power, right? So while better representation can open the door of opportunity, we can't just settle for representation. We need to look for political change that gives real material power to our communities en masse. Power means the ability to hire and fire. It means the ability to build transformative budgets and to eliminate toxic budgets. Our community should demand policies that distribute this broadly, not just into the hands of a couple representatives who we hope might be merciful to us. We need to look away from surface level things like sensitivity training and look towards things like elected civilian review boards, reform of campaign financing, anything that drives real power to people. So when you think about it, the police brutality issue, who do those cops respond to? Who are they accountable to? Well, their chief, and who does their chief respond to? Whoever elected him, and their chief, the director of police in that city, the local judges, the local district attorneys, et cetera. And who do those people respond to? They're funders, fundamentally. Who elects district attorneys? Very few people. Who elects judges? Very few people. Who elects mayors? Usually the real estate interests in whatever city we're talking about. So I wanted to bring that to the table because I absolutely believe we need to celebrate our culture and our representation, but it's clearly not the only ingredient, because as we grow in representation, somehow that doesn't produce the massive changes we want to see. And so if we want to stop living in kind of a Groundhog Day where, you know, ultimately my kids will experience the same thing I've experienced, we'll have to focus on real power. That's all I have to say. Love y'all.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dante. And I think we, as you were mentioning, especially with what was happening in Minneapolis and in Kenosha, it's been a really, really tough time. And I think we've seen those same movements, though, against police brutality in Latin America. And looking at in the summer and several months ago in Cali in Colombia and in Rio, I mean, so what happens here in the US, you know, has an effect and helps, I think, inspire folks in Latin America as well. But you're no doubt the issue of police brutality is a real one, and it's one that we have to constantly stay vigilant about and be active. Thank you so much. Next, we have the pleasure of hearing from Gloria Rosario Wallace, and Gloria is the Senior Director of Anti-Bias and School Support at the Office of Equity and Access at the New York City Department of Education, NYC. So Gloria, please. Good to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Buenas noches. So I'm setting my timer because I am Dominican. And, you know, time is a social construct, but I'm trying to be good about it. So in my work, I do a lot in terms of data, right? So I work with school districts and principals to look at the disproportionality and why, right? So I am not here to do that with you all. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to know the numbers and stats. I'm here when I thought of the word charla, and I thought about my intention in this space. I thought about, you know, as always in every space I'm in, I'm here because of those who came before me. I'm here because of those who are not yet born, right? So on the slide, I have some pictures of my siblings, of some of my ancestors some of my siblings have joined and have become ancestors, and a picture of my kids. But when I think about and that's it, I don't have a presentation. But when I think about my ancestors, I don't just think about the people who I can name, right? Knowing that as a Black person from Latin America and a Black person in this country, there's so many people who have never had the opportunity to be named. They could not say their stories, right? So I'm here for them, and I'm here for the generations of people that will come after us, right? Those who are descendants of me and those who aren't, right? So when I think about this space, right, and what it means to be Afro-Latinx, to be a Black person from Latin America, I thought back to who I was as a child and what did I need people to know. I have a visitor. What did I need people to know so they can show up for me, right? Come here, Nana. Oh, come here, come here. Somebody just woke up from their nap. Okay. So I'm Dominican. My family's from Dominican Republic. I'm very excited, Yvette, when I saw your flag in the background, right? Dramatica, girl. So my best friends, right, growing up, I grew up in Washington Heights, like 73 blocks from Yvette, right? I was in Uptown. All my friends were in the same as me. We're all Dominican kids whose parents had come here in the late 70s, early 80s, right? When I think about the harm that was caused in my youth, they were often from other Latinos, right? So my my audience isn't white Americans. I need to talk to my people. If we can figure this conversation out as Latinos, we could figure out a whole lot, right? So similar to what Dante was talking about in the systems of power and the oppressed, who has power and who does not? It is not a coincidence, right? And often when I see images of violence from police, I recognize there's so many of my friends from my old neighborhood who are police officers. Why? Because we needed jobs with a pension, and we needed some job security, and then you're in the same system that is oppressing you, right? I graduated college, immediately became a teacher at 22, Why? Because I was in that union, right? Had a good union job. So how do we, within the very same systems that we're working, how do we not do the oppression that we faced, right? One of the earliest, when I was thinking about preparing for this conversation, I thought about a conversation I had when I was 14, where I was sitting in my best friend's kitchen with her mom. And they were talking, I was just sitting there like spaced out. And my best friend was 2 years older, so she was 16, and she was dating a Black boy. He was African American. And her mother said, "Guácala, ¿por qué tú estás haciendo eso?" Right? And even if you don't speak Spanish, I think you know what guácala means. Not good, right? And she looked at me and she's like, "Right, Gloria?" And I was like, "Say what?" Like, that was a moment of cognitive dissonance where I realized, do people not realize I'm Black? Because, like, what's going on, right? Years later, right, with, you know, that was a friend I had from elementary school to middle school to high school. And we ended up in the same college. You're gonna have to wait a moment. Where people would say things like, "You can't cut your hair because people like you, you know, their hair don't grow. But people like me, you can't even say that I'm Black," right? So how do we, in these moments when we're talking to each other, or we overhear our children talking to each other, how do we interrupt, right? And one of the first things is being Black is a blessing, right? Within my body, within my DNA is a story of survival and resilience and genius and brilliance and perfection, right? And I recognize that. And I do recognize that in my DNA is also the colonizer, right? And that is the conversation and the struggle I have to have. But, oh, there goes my timer, see? Ya tú sabes. So the strategy, the greatest strategy we can have, whether it's I'm talking to Superintendent so-and-so about the 38,000 kids in their district, or I'm just talking to you all about what you can do in your personal and professional lives, is how do we recognize the humanity in each other? And we recognize that race, Blackness, indigenous folks, Asian folks have been in Latin America since before recorded time. So we, you know, don't hit up your Black friend when George Floyd is murdered, which is what happened. You know, my phone started, Mama. I started getting all these texts. I know, baby. That's not the time where we have that conversation, right? How do we make space for each other 365 days a year, right? Because I'm Black every day, right? And I'm celebrating it every day. So in these moments, so as you think about your life, as you think about your friends, and you think about your family, how do you interrupt the things that we have been spoon-fed and taught? And now I'm muting myself.
Don't mute yet, Gloria. Who is your little person? Can you share?
You want to say hi?
Hi.
Hi. Is she in the photo too, right?
Yes. Oh my.
Yes, I see. Well, this is the generation.
Baby.
We see you.
I was a little baby before I was growing up.
Yes, and now you're big.
Well, thank you, Gloria. And thank you so much, because I think that's what all of this is about, is the humanity in all of us, and seeing that and being respectful and mindful of it every day. So thank you. Next, we will turn to Brian Ovalles, and Brian is greeting us from Oakland, California. And Brian is the founder of the Orange Market. And so Brian, please, adelante.
Gracias. Firstly, thank you to HHF for creating the space. This is awesome. The fact that this exists as a platform for us to have conversations is really important. I think that when I think about, about myself as a new dad, you know, so fairly recent. I think about the future that we're going to build. I think about a healthy and sustainable future, which is what my startup is centered on. I think about, you know, the legacy that we'll leave behind. And I think about when we were first pregnant, I thought about, you know, the fact that I was going to have a Black little boy, and the fact that he was going to be raised in a society that hopefully doesn't look the same in a generation, right? Next slide. Oh, here you go. So when I was thinking about this charla, I was thinking about us kind of coming onto a train together. And I love trains. I love going on train rides, and it's a very therapeutic experience. And So allow me to be your conductor for the next 4.5 minutes as we go through this journey together. Next slide. So yeah, so this is me, this is my family, my proudest moment, being a dad, becoming a husband this past year. A misnomer, my favorite nickname is the Spanish Mama, but when you're Dominican, everybody calls you Spanish in New York City. So, but obviously that's a tribute to Kobe Bryant, the late and great Kobe Bryant. This is just a little bit about myself. And yeah, as we undergo this journey. Go ahead. So next slide. Already said it. So I wanted to talk about, I guess there's a level of mental health here. There's a level of thinking about our identities as Black people and just times that I felt Black all by myself, right? And that was the title of a poem that I had to put together when Black Lives Matter happened. And it was the first time where I was really able to communicate the loneliness that I felt. And so, yeah, I wanted to chat about Black identity and just how powerful our stories are, how in a way it's an unexpressed, sorry, I'm just gonna go off the presentation because I feel like there's just a lag. But the idea that our stories feel like an unexpressed gene that can change the perspective of this country. And so I guess when I think about my journey, I'll go to this one moment that I had recently when I have a food startup. We were delivering food to an organization that happened to be primarily African American. And when I delivered that food, I had this interaction with this woman. It was COVID, so she had her mask on and I had my mask on. We didn't really have a familial conversation, even though I had delivered there a couple of times. And so that time I decided to open up and just let her know, hey, like we're bringing, healthy food. We're doing this relief program that we're sponsored by here in Oakland. And, I let her know that we had these tofu sandwiches that we really spent a lot of time on and effort on. And we wanted the community there to try that food. And it happened to be an African-American woman. And it was the first time where we just had this open dialogue and like, it was COVID. So there was a lot of, just being timid, but in that moment, we were able to laugh and talk about food and open up these conversations that we really cared about, that were important to our community. And I remember leaving that conversation and coming back into my car and just crying by myself, because it was the first time in my life that I thought to myself, wow, we're doing this service for the Black community and I'm the startup entrepreneur and it's working. And, and I thought to myself, I've been carrying a cross of feeling like being Black was a deficit. And it was that moment where that switch happened, where I was like, I'm not beautiful despite being Black. I am beautiful because I am Black. And I felt like that message and that moment for me was something that I want, I guess, when I think about future generations and I think about being proud of our journey and thinking about the things the tools and the conversations that we have with ourselves, that we have to, really encourage ourselves and then find other people and have these conversations and talk about Blackness as beauty, because we just live in a society that, whether we're talking about identity or talking about food systems, which are designed to fail us, that are not conducive to bringing out the best in us, and that we have to take these conversations and create the future that we want to design. So I guess, yeah, for the most part, that's my message in this charla. And yeah, if you want to follow me and have these conversations, I'm at Brian Ovalle on Clubhouse or on Instagram, just DM me. And I think this is the first stop in the conversation, is navigating identity before we really move into all of these other conversations where our perspectives are going to be really valuable and are really oil under the ground. So thank you.
Wow, thank you, Brian. It was so moving. And I think seeing, as you said, seeing Black as beautiful, as an asset in all its glory and the positivity. So, and thank you for sharing that. And I think a lot of people commented on your vulnerability, which is greatly appreciated. And we continue to encourage everyone to make your comments please known to all so that we can all see and enjoy and learn from your comments. So please keep continuing to do that, to share your comments in the chat and continue sharing them with everyone so we all can read and learn from what you have to say. Thank you again, Brian. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Okay, so next we will hear from Manuel Mendes, and Manuel is chair of the DC Afro-Latino Caucus. And so Manuel is based in Washington, DC. Thank you, Manuel.
Saludos a todos. Esto es un bien dominicano, porque todos somos dominicanos, la mayoría. Soy de la República Dominicana. Mis padres son de San Pedro de Macorís, la provincia de los poetas. Let's switch over because si no me corro con la dominicanidad, pero I am a documentarian, a DC activist for youth and people of African descent. I am also the chair of the DC Afro-Latino Caucus, whose our mission is to improve the quality of life of Afro-Latinos and representation here in the DMV. For me, when I thought about this charla, I thought about two things. I thought about my elders. When my elders saw that I was interested in this, they kind of nurtured me. And so they gathered all their friends. And so they had a big focus group. So, I work at the DC Public Libraries. And so we would meet on a regular basis at the library, and we will talk about the history, individuals who make contributions in the DMV metro area. And it's interesting because the majority of you all are from New York, and I'm from, I was raised in DC, and so I don't have Washington Heights, I don't have the comfort of going to un colmadón, una bodega, although we do have some, but you have a whole, it's a lush of businesses, Dominican leaders. And one of the leaders that our elders wanted to honor first is Casilda Luna, una cocola. And so Dominicans, when we hear the name cocolos, cocolos are English-speaking islands. They have English-speaking island ancestors. So Casilda Luna's father was from Tortola, and her mother was from Puerto Rico. So she has this mixture of, and she's from Samaná, so the English, and I might include Casilda Luna is still alive. She's 94 years old and still living in our community. But the important thing about Casilda that our ancestors or our elders, La Vieja Guardia, wanted to embrace is because she had been forgotten, right? And we have in Afro-Latinidad, we have an issue of erasure and representation and visibility. Casilda Luna, for those folks that are not from Washington, DC metro area, Casilda Luna created along with other activists in the community, created the Latino festival that we celebrate here in Washington, DC. She was one of the co-authors. She is the founder of one of the oldest Latino organization here in Washington, DC. senior Vida Senior Center, which is an organization that helps seniors, Latino seniors in particular. But in this group, you know, one, we wanted to honor our elders. Two, they wanted to transfer those ideas of the challenges, the history. And Casilda will tell an amazing story of her in the March on Washington, or helping the great strike with Cesar Chavez when they came to Washington, D.C. She would talk about the segregation in Washington, D.C., where, you know, there were certain places that she could go or she couldn't go. And there's, you know, other folks like Roland Roback, who's Afro-Puerto Rican, Arturo Griffith, who is an amazing labor activist, and many more. And so those are the folks that really push me forward. And so when I thought about this charla, I said, I'm going to talk about, you know, Casilda and her contributions. And then secondly, I wanted to talk about what Dante talked about a little bit, which, and you, Kim, you spoke a little bit about, you know, representation on TV. Yes, TV needs, Spanish-speaking TV does need Spanish-speaking represent. We do need to see our faces there. We do need to see our faces in movies, but we also need to see ourselves. And I say this because I'm in the nation's capital. Aquí el poder está aquí. Y hay muchas organizaciones. There's a lot of organizations, Latino institutions that have been working here for a really long time. But we need more. We need more nonprofit directors or board that look like us. We need institutions that employ in the museums that look like us, that are on the boards, that are employed. We need for-profits to employ Afro-Latinos, and take us as an issue. One of the big problems I have with national organization is that they don't consider Afro-Latinidad as an issue, and they have to develop policy for our people, from immigration, from social to economical to political. And we see that Black voices, Black Latino voices, are always absent in those cases. And then in conclusion, porque no quiero seguir con mi dominicanidad y super hablar mucho, we all as Latino have to ask ourselves, if Latinidad and Hispanidad represents all of us, where are the African and indigenous faces? Where's the diversity of this wonderful Latin American nation? It cannot be European white passing faces. Gracias.
Gracias. Gracias a ti, Manuel. Thank you so much. And you're so right about policy and being at the table when policy is being made, and having a presence and representation and a real hand in policy, because that's where stuff gets done. So thank you very much for that. So next we will have Dr. Jacqueline Biddle Richard. Hola, Jacqueline. She is the founder and CEO of, love this title, Soy Maravillosa. I am marvelous. So you know you have to fill us in on this, because I know it is super spectacular. So Jacqueline, Dr. Jacqueline, por favor.
Yes, hello? I don't see my slides. Wonderful. So this is my journey of Latinidad, colorism, racism, and empowerment. And the first part of this journey is that I want to kind of, for you guys to look at this picture of myself, because this picture I took like on a whim one day last year, that I was just feeling this, I was in the moment, you know, and lo and behold, months later, it became really the symbol of this journey of empowerment. But I'll start first with, I'm going to tell you about 4 things that I've learned about my journey. And trust me, it's been a long journey. The first thing is this issue with my Latinidad. You know, I am una mujer negra puertorriqueña, okay? I'm a Black woman from Puerto Rico. And when I say I'm from Puerto Rico, I say it because that's where I was born. I say it because Spanish was actually my first language, que todavía lo hablo, right? I still speak it. And because the Puerto Rican customs and traditions, that's how I was raised, even though I was really raised in large part in Virginia. But as you can see how I speak, I didn't have, there was no room for a Black little girl in Virginia to speak Spanish. So I had to get with the program. I had what I thought was the program, learn English. I've always felt like I was an immigrant, really. I had to learn English and I had to go through all that. So my Latinidad is very important to me. And one thing for sure, though, about my Latinidad is that I understand that my Latinidad is not my race, right? I understand that my race is as a Black woman. So the second thing that I've learned in this journey is that my Blackness and my Latinidad can coexist together. And that's really been a struggle, right? Because when oftentimes when my African-American women friends and friends in general look at me, they're like, well, you're African-American. And yes, I am of African descent, but I identify as Puerto Riqueña, as Puerto Rican, because that's the background that I grew up in, So it took me a lot of years to come to terms with that. So I know that my Blackness and my Latinidad, my Africanness, my African descent and my Latinidad, they both coexist, and I'm very firm on that. Third is the fact that we have to reckon with this anti-Black racism right within our own Latino community. So we have to reckon with that first. I think it's important that we face it. It's important that we talk about it. It's important that we challenge it. I think that from a broader perspective, people need to understand that when some of us Afro-Latinos choose really to identify as an Afro-Latino, we might get backlash from the Latino community, and also even from people in our families that might look just like us, just for saying that we are Black, just for saying something obvious. Imagine that. And there's a reason for this, right? I can speak as a Puerto Riqueña that has ties to the island still to this day. I can tell you that in Puerto Rico, there's something called what I call it the mixed theory. So for 50 years, they didn't even take race in the census. Before that, they did actually, but for 50 years, they didn't. And what they really taught the people was that, listen, we're all Puerto Ricans here. We're all a mix of European, African, and indigenous. So we're all the same. And you know what? That works great if you're in the light or white category. If you look white or light, that works great for you. Your folks could be governors. Your folks can go to school, to go to college, had all the best jobs, live in all the best areas. So that's cool if you're that. And now people in Puerto Rico are actually starting that movement because they realized that did not work for them. So the problem with that, right? So on the one hand, it seems cool, right? But the problem with it is that, number one, people don't want to identify as Black. And 2010 and 2010 were a perfect example, where in the census, the number of people who identified as only white was even higher than in the US mainland, which is insane. But yet, and I think one of the other folks mentioned this, they really utilize and take the customs and cultures that come from Africa, right? So we're talking about bomba plena, the food, all kinds of stuff. So they're willing to accept all that, but they're not willing to accept the Black people of the island. And Black Puerto Ricans on the island are just far worse, economic and educational, and that came up already in the charla today, as their light or white counterparts. And that's because of racism. It's because of colonialism. So that whole white supremacy mentality, that is alive and well in Puerto Rico. And I knew that even as a young kid, I knew that. Fourth, Afro-Latinos, my fourth thing that I've really learned, and my fourth insight, is the fact that Afro-Latinos need to really come together and take hold of their African descendants. They need to be proud of it. They need to they need to own it, because that is really the only way. That's a sign of strength, and it's the only way that we're going to feel that we're going to be empowered. But first you have to own it. First you have to really identify who it is that you see in the mirror. Next slide, please. So that leads me to my resolution. My resolution is really Soy Maravillosa. So Soy Maravillosa is an Afro Latinx organization, and I also think it's an initiative that I started. And really the purpose is to raise Afro Latinx awareness, to recognize Afro Latinx people, and to amplify the Afro Latinx voice in spaces like healthcare, education, and professional organizations. My mission is to educate. I think number one, we have to educate ourselves about what it means, what it is to be Afro-Latino, right? About our history. We just didn't fall out of the sky. Our ancestors didn't just drop out of the sky. They were enslaved people who were brought here, who were stolen, who was kidnapped and brought here, okay, and landed in the Caribbean and in Latin America. We have to educate ourselves. We have to educate other people, because people do not understand that, okay? My mission is to advocate. Heck, I'm a lawyer. So I want to make sure that I advocate for equity, but I want to advocate for equity for us Afro-Latinos, even within our own, this Latinidad. And I think it's important to build alliances. My mission is also to build alliances, because this isn't work that can be done alone. How cool it would be if Black women here in the US worked with the Black women in Puerto Rico in el colectivo ILE to really move forward that agenda of equal rights for Afro-Latinos on the island. How awesome would that be? But here in the US as well, I think it is important to build bridges with people of who are not Latinos, with people who are Latinos as well, because there are people who are Latinos who actually are benefiting from their whiteness and not really sharing it with anybody else. So this is basically my story for today. This has been such an awesome thing to share and to hear from everybody else. And my next page, please. If you want more information about Soy Maravillosa, please, you can find me on Facebook at Afro Latinx Culture. And my website is soymaravillosa.org. And you can email me directly at Jacqueline@soymaravillosa.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacqueline. And Antonio said you are, si eres maravillosa. So thank you so much for that. And just a gentle, kind reminder to everyone, please continue to, when you make a comment in the chat, to make sure that it's for everyone, so we all can again see all these great comments that are coming in, because they are wonderful. We learn from you. It's a two-way street. We want to keep the lines of communication open, so please continue to make sure that you share with everyone. So next we have Mr. Sid Wilson. Hi, Sid. It's great to see Sid. Sid is the president and CEO of ACER, and it's great to see you. So I will let Sid continue, please.
Well, first, let me just say what a you know, how great this is to be here with mi gente. And first, I want to just give a big thank you to Tony Tijerino, President and CEO for the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, for not only having this platform and this space to have these discussions, but Tony has always been one of the strongest allies in the movement, in the struggle, in this initiative to make sure that our community is illuminated. He is no stranger to not waiting for the community to get buy-in when you got to do the right thing. And Tony always comes out first. And I do want to thank him not only for this, but but last spring when we had to have some serious discussions about race within our own Latino community. I really commend Tony Tijerino and the Hispanic Heritage Foundation for that. Also, Kim, I want to congratulate you because your show on Afro-Latino travels is such an important topic and dialogue that does not get discussed, because it's so important that we have to start learning not only ourselves, but also how we teach our youth about the full history and story of Blacks in the New World. We are taught in our K-12 education that everything started in the 13 colonies, and there was nothing else happening in the New World other than the 13 colonies. We won the Revolutionary War, and then all of a sudden, we discovered the Mississippi Valley, and then we go west, and then all these new discoveries that were never there, and all these other things were all discovered by America as we started going from the 1700s and 1800s and 1900s, when we all know that that is absolutely far from the truth. I know I'm here with my fellow Dominican brothers and sisters, and we know that Santo Domingo was the first permanent settlement of the New World. But it's also important to know what happened during that period. The number of Blacks that were brought to Latin America as slaves, and why is it that that such a significant, sad part of our history goes virtually untaught in the United States? So most of us that are Afro-Latino grow up having to first learn it ourselves, because we don't get taught it in our schools. And two is that if you, and I'm fortunate that I was raised in a family that was very proud of our Dominican Afro-Latino culture. So we never, shied away from our Blackness. But we also know that there are families that did shy away from their Blackness. And so when you have parents that shy away from their Blackness and their kids grow up with parents who shy away from their Blackness, it's no surprise that you get a certain number of Afro-Latinos who check off white when they need to check off Black, and understanding those histories. And when we look at not only what is happening in our country, but also what is happening even within our community. A little bit about me, and I love many of the photos that that many of you were sharing. I don't know if I have the ability to share. I might be able to share one photo. So if I can, I'll try to share. If not, it's a photo of my father, Dr. James Wilson's graduation from La Juaz, University Autónoma de Santo Domingo Medical School back in 1957, when it was rare for Black Dominicans to graduate from college, much less medical school. My father was one of the earlier ones, and he and my mother, got married in the 1960s, and then came here and opened up one of the earliest medical practices in Washington Heights on the corner of 170th and Audubon back in 1966. And so that started the movement to get more Dominican physicians to come to Washington Heights and to establish their practice. My parents, my mother, Nilda Wilson, my father, Dr. James Wilson, were the co-founders of the Dominican Medical Society way back in 1972. And since then have continued to be active. My father passed away last April to COVID, unfortunately, after 54 years of marriage to my mother. But his legacy lives on through me and through our family, and also through our pride as Dominican Afro-Latinos. I know for me, wherever I go, my goal is to make sure that I'm illuminating and sending the message that as Afro-Latinos, we are not going to try to assimilate or fit in. We are going to stand out so that instead of us trying to assimilate to a perception of who we should be, we are calling on all people, Latinos included, in fact, Latinos especially, to acculturate to us. So it's acculturation to us, not us assimilating to something that we are not. And so when I became the first Afro-Latino to become president and chief executive officer of any major national Hispanic organization, when I became CEO for the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, I made sure that as I was going around corporate America, advancing our mission of advancing Hispanic inclusion in corporate America, that included our Afro-Latino brothers and sisters. And so one of the things that we did last year, and we just did a second one just yesterday, is having discussions that have never happened in corporate America. Conversations about Afro-Latinos in corporate America. And yesterday, we did a webinar on Afro-Latinas in corporate America, because if you work in corporate America, you are often asked, are you going to go with the Black Employee Resource Group or the Latino Employee Resource Group? When you fill out, are you Black or are you Latino? And for millions of Afro-Latinos who work in corporate America, who are asked to go into either this group or that group, we're saying, well, you have to understand us, who we are. We are proud Latinos. We are proud Black people. And we need to make sure that we feel included as a community. And my brother, who was actually the godfather of merengue hip hop, you all know his music. His name is Magic Juan. He was with Proyecto Uno back in the day. No pare, sigue, sigue, se la llevó tiburón. That's my brother. Proud of the fact that he took his craft to create a genre that had never happened before in the 1990s, that launched the group Proyecto Uno, and now he's still a very successful solo artist. But the one thing that makes me so proud is the fact that when having traveled with him and many other areas, we see all these areas in Latin America and the Afro-Latino history, whether it's Luis de Puerto Rico, or Santurce, or Limón, Costa Rica, or Esmeralda, Ecuador, or Cartagena, Colombia. Other areas where we know that Veracruz, Mexico as well. All these areas where we know that there is a history, not only the history of Latinos in the Caribbean, the Garifunas in Central America, and many other communities and the history. But this has to get taught. And so that's why we have to make sure that we are promoting a culture of acculturation to our Afro-Latino community, not telling Afro-Latinos to pick one or pick the other. You know, this is not, I'm either Black or I'm Latino. We are Afro-Latinos, and this is our community, and it is important that everyone acculturates to us. And as the president and chief executive officer of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, Yvette Peña and I are very involved with the National Museum of the American Latino Movement. Proud of Yvette now serving on the executive committee of the Museum Movement. When I was, when the Museum Commission was created, I was the only Afro-Latino named by President Obama to the National Museum of the American Latino Commission. And you can rest assured that when we were doing our studies, I said, you cannot have a National Museum of the American Latino if the Afro-Latino story is not told. And so when that day happens, and we have that ribbon cutting of that future museum on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., I can rest assured that our story will be told, the true story of how we came to the New World and the true story of how we have illuminated and been a part of the American experience, not only here, but throughout Latin America. So I just want to say thank you so much to Tony Tejerino, to the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. Congratulations, Kim Haas. Congratulations to all of you. I mean, all of you have amazing, inspiring stories. Valente mi gente, we're gonna keep moving, we're gonna keep marching, we're gonna keep locking arms, and we're gonna say, we shall overcome and si se puede, mi gente. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sid. And I think, you know, you are amazing. And I think that's where I think I saw Antonio saying, that's why you are where you are. And that's why you are representing so well. So thank you for those beautiful remarks and all that you do every day to make a difference. Truly. Thank you. Pardon me. I was saying that next we have, last but certainly not least, is Mr. Nelson Cruz. Nelson is digital communicator with CH.
I'm sorry. I think I was going after Sid. Dania.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dania, perdón. Dania Santana. Nelson, you're coming up. Dania is multiculturalism and diversity and inclusion advocate. And Dania, perdón. Please, adelante.
No te preocupes. Thank you very much. I'm very energized after listening to Sid, and everyone that has spoken here has touched on so many important topics. So it's hard to pick a topic and, you know, in the time constraints that we have today. But I just want to make a comment on Sid. Now that we have kids that are not going to school, they're here. I'm all the time nodding and hitting my head when my kid is taking history lessons, because it's like, I feel the school teaches them and I need to unteach what they, you know, what they learn. Like, sometimes they're saying stuff and I'm contradicting, and my son is like, what is going on? Because he doesn't know what to, you know, pay attention to the teacher or me. But there's just so much, there's a lack of visibility. And I think that's the main reason we're all here. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I didn't bring any slides, but I'm Dania Santana, and I'm otra Dominicana, another Afro-Dominican in this group. I have 3 kids, and I'm a language worker and a multicultural parenting expert. And I'm very passionate about diversity and inclusion and social justice. And unlike most of the people in this group, I was born and raised in Santo Domingo, and I just moved to the United States as an adult. So my experience, you know, was shaped very differently. I grew up in the city of Santo Domingo, but in Villamella, which is a very, you know, Black, vibrant community. And although, like many Dominicanos, you know, my mother is considered a white Dominican, my father is the one who is Black. My mother's family was limited to her and her mother. So I grew up with my Black family. So when I first came to the US, the fact that, you know, telling people I was Dominican wasn't clear enough that I was Black was puzzling to me. I just didn't get it. Because I grew up in a Black community with a Black family, you know, merengue music. Like, to me, being Dominican is synonymous to being Black. And most Dominicans are mainly Black. So, you know, like 90%. Even the people that look white, like my mother, for example, has a higher percentage in her DNA of Black. So to me, that wasn't never a question until I came to the US. And once I came here and started interacting and working professionally, I realized the importance of identifying, not because I didn't know I was Black before, but because it was important for people to know that I knew, you know, that that's part of my identity as well. So one of the things I want to talk about today is, you know, language justice and inclusion and how that impacts Afro-Latinos. And I want to tell you a very particular experience. My father, he's 71 years old. He's a Black Dominican man who lives in Michigan, and he speaks a little English, I understand, but, you know, he has limitations on that. So every time he has a doctor's appointment or any kind of appointment or social work or whatever, he calls me and I have to be the interpreter fortunately for him, I'm a professional translator and interpreter. So he's lucky like that. But I know so many people, unlike my father, that are lacking the access, because when they get there, the first thing people see is a Black person. So they automatically assume this person speaks English. So from the get-go, you might be mislabeled in the sense of, oh, you're Black, so maybe your social worker is assigned, it's not a Latino social worker, because they just assume you're African American. Or, you know, and you can be Black from an African country even and not speak English. So there's so many limitations just because of the invisibility. Personally, I lived in Michigan for a couple of years. I remember going to El Centro Hispano and be sitting there, you know, with my curls, and this Mexican man look at me and he's like, "Why are you here?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Isn't this for Mexicans?" And I said, "Well, it's called El Centro Hispano. So it's for, you know, Hispanos, Latinos, everywhere." And he just nodded. But at that moment, I realized he didn't even see me as a Latino person. He was, you know, he said it was only for Mexicans, but I think what he meant is place for Latinos. What are you doing here? And I am fortunate to be bilingual, to be able to interact with people in both languages. But for many Afro-Latinos, the lack of language is a problem. And we see through our organizations that even organizations that are fighting for the rights of Latinos and minorities, the lack of accessibility to language is a problem. And that's one of the things I do. I belong to language justice community and organization, and we help organizations, nonprofit organizations, to integrate language justice, because of the nature of English and the US being a powerful country, we assume English is best, or it should be the norm somehow. But when you prevent people from communicating in the language that they know best, you are telling them their stories and their contributions are less important. And then you're creating this situation in which, for Afro-Latinos, is the fact that personally, because my complexion is not as dark, when I identify as Black, people are suspicious. You know, Black people in this country are suspicious because I identify. But even with Latinos, if I say I'm Latina, it's okay. But even when I say I'm Afro-Latina, it makes people uncomfortable. And I think all of that has to do with lack of visibility and lack of having these conversations. And I totally agree with most of the speakers today. This is a conversation, and this is something we need to work within the Latino community first. And, you know, not that we're gonna neglect the other side, but really amongst Latinos, we need to identify and acknowledge our biases and the racist views that we have and that we grew up with, and start changing those conversations as people that are here and we have other information, and maybe our grandparents, they didn't have the educational level, or they had other difficulties that didn't allow them to be fully recognition of I'm a Black person and I'm a human being. And due to that, also, when people come from Latin America, there's a transfer of that same you know, ideas that people talk about African Americans, you know, in the news and stuff. So Latinos create that thing of, oh yeah, you know, Black people from this country somehow are different because they're bad. And if they think about it, this is the same thing people were saying about you in your own country. So now you don't want to be on that side because you're not listening to the people, you're listening to the white voices that are saying how Black people should be or are or behave, and all those labels that come from colonialism and from oppression. So because this is such a broad topic, I just want to leave you with this message. As a mother, my responsibility, what I do is to, you know, talk to my kids about being Black, about what it means to be Dominican and Black, and about Black people in the US, because we're here, and because of African Americans, we have been so fortunate to have so many things. Even though there's discrimination, what they have experienced before us, they have paved a way for all of us, but especially for Black Latinos to exist in this country in a different light, even with all the oppression that exists today. So teaching our kids And most importantly, maybe you're not gonna change the mind del abuelo, you know, the grandparents or your family members, but I don't have to educate those people, but I do not accept them telling stuff to my kids that is incorrect, that is racist. So when that happens, address it. Maybe, you know, you have nothing to add to the older person, that maybe they're not gonna change their mind, but you need to show your kids there's nothing wrong with being Black. There's nothing wrong with, you know, standing up for yourself, and that racism is not okay. From abuelita, from el tío, I don't care. And, you know, identify as an Afro-Latina, I've heard it all. From my own family, people say that I pretend to be Black. From people's, you know, they struggle with it. And the white Latinos also, it's like they don't know how to even talk to you after you identify. It's like something weird, but we need to go through those awkwardness and then say, okay, you know, this is who I am, this is my identity, and I come to you as this, and I deserve the same respect and the same acknowledgement as anybody else. So teaching our kids that racist language is not okay, but also understanding that as Afro-Latinos, we are at the many intersection of different groups that are oppressed. Anti-LGBTQ commentary is really bad amongst Latinos as well. So teaching your children and teaching others to respect everybody, because we want respect as Black people, but then, you know, there's a Black person that happens to be queer, and then that is a problem, or we make fun of, or, you know, those kinds of things. We need to change the conversation. And one of the ways I do it is I stop it in the tracks. Whatever racism that you're speaking in front of my kids, I address it right then and there. I correct the person, and I tell my kids that is not correct, that is not acceptable. Because if not, sometimes we don't want to make other people uncomfortable, and our kids, that's what they're seeing. You know, they hear it, somebody says it, you laugh it off, and maybe you're uncomfortable, you don't say anything. So that's what your kid is getting. My mom says this, but, you know, grandpa says that, and it's okay. So I might tell, you know, grandpa or uncle or whoever, they have those views, but that's not right. And, you know, this is the way. And I think that's a way how we can contribute in changing the conversation. And as organizations, the people here that have power within organizations is thinking about language justice as a part of your mission. Whatever it is that you do, whatever community you serve, make sure when you have meetings, when the community that you're serving is there, that there's access to language. And sometimes that's Spanish, but sometimes we're talking about indigenous language. So get interpretation and make those voices heard, and make people feel that it's okay, they can be proud to speak the language they speak, and that not necessarily need to speak English to be heard and to be valued as another human being. And there's so many other things I could say, like everybody says, as Dominicana, I could go on, but I'm gonna be mindful of the time. Thank you very much. I would, you know, I want to connect with all of you, and you can find me online. And I talked a lot about Afro-Latinos, American Latinos, and diversity and inclusion. So I will welcome the conversation online as well. So thank you and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Dania. And you talked about, you know, connecting online, but you're connecting now. And I think what you were saying about language is so powerful. And I love, as someone else was saying just now, language justice. I think Luis was just saying that. And that's an important term. And we can use language, you know, for good and for positive, and to strengthen and unite, just as well as it's used, unfortunately, in maybe not some, you know, so great terms. So thank you for mentioning and talking about the importance of language, because it's key. Okay, so now Nelson, it is your turn. Ahora te toca a ti. Nelson Cruz is the digital communicator with CHCI. And I turn it over to you, Nelson. Thank you so much.
A shout out to Marco. I just saw him in the comments. First, I just want to say thank you to Tony and HHF for having me. And yeah, so a little quick background about myself. I'm of Dominican descent. I was raised in Columbia Heights, Northwest Washington, D.C., for those of you who are familiar with the area. And as Kim mentioned, I am the social media and digital content manager over at CHCI. And but outside of my duties within the communications team, I also started a very small local nonprofit by the name of La Unión DC, which in a nutshell is a youth-led, youth-driven art collaborative that mentors minority youth ages 14 to 24 who have a passion for education, entrepreneurship, and the arts. And coincidentally, one of my mentors, Manuel Mendes, is actually a part of today's conversation. We decided to create a passion project that basically is an attempt to juxtapose experiences between older generation and newer generation Afro-Latinos in the DC area to figure out where the commonalities are and where there's opportunities for growth and change, right? And as a result, we created what will soon become a web series, which you will see a short rendition of in a few minutes. But this project kind of came as a result of frustration and wanting to shed light on a lot of our unsung heroes that have done so much for our community, especially here in DC, that have not, received their due diligence and their flowers. And I think part of that too is just because generally speaking, I feel like our Latino serving institutions and our media networks should do more to shed light on these stories and really make Afro-Latino and Afro-Latinidad a priority when we come to broadcasting our race and our stories and even our failures, right? Just highlighting our community in general. To Sid's point earlier as well, I think we need to have more representation on the Latino serving institution side. As a young man, as a young Black man at that, it's very discouraging sometimes when you look up and in some of these institutions that we are not present, right? Whether it's Black women, whether it's Black men, we need to work with our Latino serving institutions. We need to work with these big networks to ensure that our stories are present. All that to say, I do want to take a little bit of time just to show you all this project that I'm referring to. Yes, can we hit play on that, please?
I knew that I was Latina, but I also knew that I was Black. But I knew that I wasn't, a little Black girl, but I wasn't a white Latina either. Being Latino and being Afro-Latino is really a state of mind. If you come from any other country and you're a person of color and you come here, you have to deal with the issue of race here. It wasn't until one of my mentors in high school, who's a poet, said in one of her poems, Afro-Latina. So that's what you call me? I was like, oh, dope. Like, it wasn't a term that my parents taught me. It was the term that I taught my parents. I was born in Panama. I came to the United States in 1963 with my mother and brothers and sisters. My father was already here in the United States for 10 years before us. I was born in Santurce, Puerto Rico, 1944. My family came to New York in 1946. I grew up with Chinese, I grew up with Jewish people, I grew up with Italians, Blacks, Panamanians, and Cubans, and other Puerto Ricans. My dad is Black and Panamanian. My mom is born and raised in DC, she's Dominican. I rarely claim my Panamanian side because I don't know much about Panama or the culture. When I came here, I had to go to school, and I went through a lot of changes just to survive in the school. I don't have any memory of being in a formal environment learning English. I did it on the stoop of the street where I lived. Growing up in DC, I went to Oyster Adams. It was predominantly white. There was a few Latino kids, very few Black kids. I don't know, I really felt like separate, like really different. It was very apparent that I was different. I had to survive and fight to make sure that I did. I just got thrown into a system that the individuals didn't speak my language. I was around 13 years old when Martin Luther King got killed. It was a big moment for the community, but for me too.
I began to understand the struggle of my people in Panama because of the movement here in the United States, what was happening to African Americans here when the rise took place, opened up the entire system and people got benefited. There were youth centers that developed, there were programs that developed for young people. There were all kinds of things that began to develop. And we were in the middle of that and we were able to get our things. That's how the Latin American Youth Center got born. And many, many Black African Latinos who actually built that center, and it opened up that center to serve the Latino community youth. And politics became part of our life, of our family. The Civil Rights Movement created an identity movement with everybody.
Yeah, so in the interest of time, I just want to say thank you. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that very small excerpt. And yeah, I encourage everyone to go watch it if you'd like to learn more. And yes, you can also find me on LinkedIn at Nelson Cruz. And I look forward to continuing the conversation and connecting with everyone else here. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you all, the panelists, you all, everybody participating guests. We really appreciate it. This was a wonderful session, a wonderful charla. Just want to remind you that there's an emergency vaccine charla on February 19th at 4 o'clock Eastern. So please check that out. Go to HispanicHeritageFoundation.org for all the information. And please stay connected on social media. We thank you all so much. #HHF, and please continue to be well, inspire each other. Lots of love, and a big thank you to Antonio Tijerino and the entire staff. Have a good evening.